In this session, friends, we would be talking on rehabilitation and recovery, a unit in your curriculum Advanced Bank Management. During this talk, we would be talking on, that is, stressed assets, non-performing assets, the guidelines for classification of the non-performing assets. We will also touch the willful defaulters and penal provisions thereof, and we would be discussing, or we would be talking on the viability norms and various options available to the banks in stress accounts. As also we will talk on the various institutions, that is CDR mechanism, that corporate debt recovery, then SARFAESI Act, then DRT, etc. Now we talk about stress asset. What do you mean by stress assets? The name itself, stress assets. Stress assets are those assets in which a default has either already taken place, already occurred, or there is potential for a default. These stress assets may be either standard assets or non-performing assets. According to RBI, the stress assets or non-performing assets which have increased significantly are eating the profits of the Indian banks, in particular public sector banks. Why we are talking, because eating of the profit means once an account becomes non-performing assets, means it is not performing. So the banks are required to make increased provision for the assets. That is one. Another one, the interest, the meter is stopped. The interest, charging of the interest is stopped. So these two aspects would have a direct hit on the profitability or bottom line of the banks. Besides these two, there is increased provision, the capital adequacy norms would also apply, and accordingly banks are required to make provision towards capital adequacy, that is increase in the provisions. Then above all, there is a reputational risk also, because the status of the bank is also determined by the quality of the assets. When in a bank where the assets are, the major chunk of the assets are substandard or an NPA, then naturally that position gets deteriorated. It is indirectly, it is a reputational risk also. So that is the reason why RBI says that it is eating the profit of the Indian banks, in particular public sector banks. This is a special feature so far as public sector banks are concerned. So what is this also leads to that provisioning coverage ratio is getting declined. As per the norms, the banks are required to maintain the provisioning coverage ratio, PCR, of 70% of the loss assets. But what is provisioning coverage ratio? PCR, provisioning coverage ratio, or PCR, is essentially the ratio of provisioning to gross non-performing assets, and that indicates what? That indicates the amount of provisions, or let's say extent of funds a bank has kept aside to cover the loan losses. So then what? Then we have seen that stressed asset. Then what is non-performing assets? A non-performing asset is an asset that is including a leased asset ceases to generate income, that is treated as non-performing assets. Certain guidelines are given how to classify an account as whether it is standard, whether it is substandard, or whether it is standard, or whether it is non-performing asset. Substandard and doubtful and all will be classification of the non-performing assets. So in the case of term loan, if the interest and or installment of the principal is overdue beyond a period of 90 days, then the term loan is to be classified as non-performing asset. Then overdraft cash credit account, if the amount is the outstanding remains out of order beyond a period of 90 days, then it is to be treated as non-performing asset. Then bills, if the overdue bills which are not paid on due date remain overdue, that is, they become overdue. If that remains beyond 90 days, then bills are also treated as non-performing assets. Then comes crop loans. Crop loans can also be divided into two sections. That is, crop loan given for short duration crops. Crop loan for short duration crops. In that case, if the default, if the repayment of interest and principal, the repayment of interest and installment of the principal remains overdue for two crops. So in the case of crop loans which are given against short-term crops or short duration crops, in that case, if the installment of principal or interest remains overdue for two crops or two crop seasons, then those outstanding should be classified as not performing assets. Similarly, in the case of crop loans for long duration crops, if installment of principal and interest remain overdue for one crop season, then that will be classified as non-performing assets or NPA. Now comes this NPA can also be classified into different categories. How they are categorized? The broad category, that is, NPAs are categorized as substandard, then doubtful and loss assets. Then the classification, what is the main yardstick for classification of the NPAs? NPAs are being classified based on the period for which the assets remain non-performing and realizability of the dues. That is a criteria for determining the classification in which category that non-performing assets falls. And accordingly, these assets can be classified in broadly on three categories. As I told, one is substandard, second one is doubtful, and third one is loss assets. The substandard, what is the parameter fixed for classifying a non-performing asset as a substandard category? So that is, if the dues remain NPA, that is, what is the outstanding or the dues remain NPA for a period not less than or equal to 1 year, then it is classified as substandard category. And what is the indication? What is the implication? What is the significance? Here, that indicates that the current net worth of the borrower or the guarantor is not adequate to take care of the dues payable to the bank. And not only that, the security available is also inadequate to take care of the dues payable to the bank. And there is likely loss. In this substandard category, there is another indication is that there is a likely loss if the deficiencies are not set right. If this persists, if this continues, in that case the bank may face some losses also. And coming to second category, that is doubtful debts or doubtful assets. The doubtful assets are assets which remained NPA beyond 1 year or which remained substandard, because substandard up to 1 year is classified as substandard. If that asset remained in substandard category beyond 1 year is called or can be categorized as doubtful assets. And in that case, what does it indicate? It is an indication that recovery highly questionable and improbable, because there is a unlikely that the bank may get full recovery unless it goes for some sort of remedial measures. Then the third category is loss assets. Loss assets, what is a parameter for that? To classify an asset, classify the dues as loss asset. It is an asset considered uncollectible and little value not written off wholly by the bank. It is very unlikely that bank may get the full amount, but it may get something, and that too at the time of disposal of the asset charged to the bank. Sometimes bank may not get anything. There is a loss, name itself loss assets. Then what is a indication? That continues as a bankable asset, although it has some salvage value, salvage or recovery value. Bank may get something, say 5%, 10%, depending upon their realizable value at the time of disposal. Now some guidelines have been framed, guidelines have been issued by Reserve Bank of India to all the banks and financial institutions within which all this classification is being done by the institutions. What are the guidelines? First, one of the guidelines is that the availability of security or net worth of the borrower or a guarantor should not be taken while identifying an asset as NPA. Then what is the base for a classification? As we have already discussed, that is the period for which the asset remained NPA and the realizability of the dues. That should be the guideline, that should be the parameter by which that asset should be classified as whether it is NPA or it is a standard asset. So here the availability of the security or the net worth of the borrower or guarantor should not be taken for classification of an asset as NPA. Another parameter, another guidelines is that a NPA account other than restructured or rescheduled. In the later part we are going to discuss what is restructuring, what is rescheduling. Restructuring or rescheduling, both are the same only. And assets or the NPA loan account, NPA account or loan account other than what is restructured or rescheduled, reschedule can be upgraded to standard asset upon payment of the arrears of interest and unpaid interest, and arrears of interest, unpaid interest and principal. An NPA loan account other than restructured or rescheduled can be upgraded upon payment of the interest, arrears and principal and installments. Then another guideline is that asset classification should be on the borrower wise and not on facility wise. In other words, if a borrower is having say 2-3 facilities, one of the facility has become non-performing or it has become overdue and it has crossed the delinquency norms of 90 days. In that case, bank cannot classify that particular account as NPA. Bank has to classify all the accounts of that particular borrower as non-performing assets. That is why asset classification should be on borrower wise and not facility wise. Another guideline is that asset classification should be on borrower wise and not on facility wise. What does it mean? Suppose a borrower is having 3-4 accounts, say loan account, cash credit facility, overdraft and like that. In one of the accounts, one of the account has become NPA. That means it crossed the delinquency norms of 90 days. In that case, bank cannot classify that particular account as non-performing asset. Instead, bank should classify all the facilities enjoyed by the borrower as NPA. That is why it should be classification should be on borrower base and not on facility wise. Similarly, the bills discounted under LC. See, when LC means the issuing bank has established the LC, so the liability or the liability rests on the issuing bank only. So there is nothing to do with the borrower till such time the bills are dishonored by the LC issuing bank. In that case, the position is otherwise. In that case, the bank is required to classify entire dues as non-performing assets. Similarly, advances or loans granted against the paper securities such as the bank's own fixed deposits, term deposit receipts, TDRs, then IVP, KVP, then NSCs, National Savings Certificate, etc. That because that is for surrender value, if the surrender value exceeds the outstanding, then they need not be classified as non-performing assets. Because every time whenever such finances are made, such advances are made, bank will insist for the margin. If the margin is adequate, then there is no need to classify those accounts, those advances as NPA. Then loan with the moratorium, loan with the moratorium for payment of interest. In many cases, suppose initial this one bank has financed for a machinery, so and income generation only when that machinery is installed and it is commissioned. So some moratorium time is given for payment of the installment, payment of the interest. If suppose that interest falls during that moratorium period, moratorium means the time given for making payment of the installment and interest. If the interest, what interest will be accrued there, but even though it exceeds 90 days, it cannot be classified as an NPA. Then advanced back by central government, though overdue as NPA, though overdue may be treated as NPA only when the government repudiates the guarantee. Same in the case of LC issuing bank. The LC discounted under bills discounted under LC is dishonored by that LC issuing bank, then that will become an NPA. Here the same, like that only, here also, advances backed by the guarantee of central government, though overdue may be treated as NPA only when the government repudiates the guarantee when invoked. Then another this one, see, banks, the facilities can be, means there are various ways of dispensation of the credit. There is one of the ways, or one of the ways is the consortium advances. Consortium wherein a group of banks are involved to finance a particular borrower. Suppose in the case of consortium banks, the NPA classification should also be based on the period of recovery of the individual banks and not collectively. Suppose in one bank the account become NPA, then only that dues with that bank will become NPA and not the dues of all the member banks. That is, asset classification of accounts under consortium is to be based on the record of delivery of the individual member banks, not collective basis. Then let us talk on what is willful defaulter. Who can be called? Which borrower can be called as a willful defaulter? Here, the name itself, willful, intentional. It is not unintentional, it is intentional. There is the intentional default in payment of the loan as per the agreed terms is called as willful defaulter. And it might have occurred with some reasons. There are two reasons. The main two reasons are, one is diversion of the funds. That includes diversion of the funds include the fund for which the finance has been availed must have been utilized for creating some other assets. If the fund is taken for acquiring a machinery and it is utilized for some other purpose, in that case it will be classified as a diversion of the fund. Then another one is this fund received, the finance availed and then subsequently the credits, all of the things should be deposited in that account. It must, the sale proceeds and other things are routed through some other bank with the intention to divert the funds. That type of transactions are also called as diversion of the funds. Then this money, the finance which is availed from the bank, is utilized for investment in some group companies without the permission of the financing bank. Normally financing bank won't agree, but the purpose is not served and it is diverted. Then another is, one is diversion of the funds, second one is siphoning of the funds. Siphoning, the name siphoning, the fund is siphoned. It is utilized the borrower funds for purposes unrelated to the operation of the unit. That is a siphoning of the funds. So these are the two major areas, and if this borrower is indulged in diversion of funds or siphoning of the funds, then that borrower is called or treated as willful defaulter. Without making the payment of the bank, he has indulged in this kind of activities. Now, what are the penal measures proposed by Reserve Bank of India in such cases? But the basic thing is that penal measures are applicable only for the borrowers who borrowers whose outstanding is outstanding of 25 lakhs and above. Below that, these penal measures are not applicable. Suppose a borrower whose total outstanding comes to 20 lakhs, then these penal measures are not applicable, for which bank has to proceed. So bank has to initiate some other actions for recovery or taking actions. Here, if the outstanding is of 25 lakhs and above, some penal measures are stipulated by Reserve Bank of India. The first and foremost is that if it is an existing account, only these kind of things will happen, that is that indulged in this kind of diversion and siphoning. So no additional finance. So far as once it is identified that this is a willful defaulter, then bank should not consider any additional facilities. Even if it is genuine, or even if its requirement is genuine or not, once he is classified as, he is treated as a willful defaulter, no additional funds should be provided. And another one is, and this borrower should be debarred from availing funds from any other bank or financial institutions for a period of not less than 5 years. That is another penal provision to be imposed on the borrower because of this willful default. Then another one is that bank should also take legal action, including criminal action, because it's a conspiracy or criminal action he has involved in. He is not going as per the terms of the sanction, and he has siphoned or diverted the fund. So criminal action can be taken. Then bank can also, with the powers, bank can also consider change in the management. If it is a public limited company and that authority is given at the time of execution of the document itself, with that authority, bank can also take action in removing or changing the management of the willful defaulters. That is applicable only in the case of public limited companies or large industries. Then what are the options available to the banks when an account becomes stressed account? Stressed account, as I told you, it may be either standard account or a non-performing assets. When the symptom of sickness has already been identified, and in that case, what banks would naturally think about coming out of the finance or coming out of the asset. So what are the options available? And if the unit is viable, also bank can also consider some other measures to revive the unit. So the first and foremost is the banker will always consider to exit, to come out of the finance. So once the symptom is already there, and it is very difficult for the borrower also to find out, say, another bank for his credit requirements or taking over the account by another bank. It is a difficult proposition for the borrower and as well as the bankers also. So here, naturally, in that case, if the bankers are not able to find out a third bank if the borrower is not able to find out the third bank, in that case banker has to leave that option and bank has to think about other options. The second option is available is that is either restructuring or rescheduling, that we have already indicated in our earlier talk. The restructuring or restructuring or rescheduling. Then another option available is rehabilitation. Then if that is also not possible, then bank can consider some sort of, bank can offer some sort of compromise. Or then if that is also not workable, then bank may go for legal action. And that is even after legal action, or if legal action is not a feasible proposition, in that case bank can consider write-off of the amount on whatever residual, whatever security available, dispose it off and write off. If no security is available, entire amount should be charged to the profit and loss and we can close down the account. Even if that account is closed also, bank's charge would remain. Wherever possible, bank will try to recover the dues. So we will discuss one by one.